So, welcome to LiberalViewer Sunday Live Clip Roundup. Thanks for joining me. I've got about 30 clips on several topics for what I think should be an informative show tonight. Sorry, there was a little bit of a delay getting everything all ready, but things should be going now. This is, as always, my weekly broadcast of the best clips from the Sunday morning news analysis shows from the corporate media here in the United States, along with a little political comedy and along with my commentary between the clips. As always, I'll be using clips from the Sunday morning news shows on the regular big five outlets of ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and Fox News, plus a couple quasi-news clips, one from HBO's Real Time with Bill Maher and one from last night's Saturday Night Live on NBC. I'll be talking mainly about the big story, the Ukraine crisis with Russian forces in the Crimea, and I'll also talk a little bit about the governor of Arizona's veto of an anti-gay law there this week. But first, I wanted to start with a couple clips on President Obama's new initiative to help young black men this week, which is called My Brother's Keeper. And Cicely Strong on last night's Weekend Update covered that story like this.
President Obama this week launched a new effort to help young minority men, warning them not to make the same mistakes he did when he was their age, such as get high and not take school seriously. Unless, of course, they definitely want to be president.
Yeah, what she's talking about there is what President Obama said at this meeting where he met all these young black men who were at risk, and he talked to them about his personal experiences and some of the mistakes he made. And I want to show a quick one other clip on this issue. There's ABC's Pierre Thomas on This Week with George Stephanopoulos. He actually talked to a few of these young men and asked them what they wanted to be and what the biggest obstacle for them getting there was. And I thought it's the kind of thing you don't really see on the corporate media news shows a lot. And then there's also the little clip of President Obama at the end talking about his mistakes so that you understand what that joke on Saturday Night Live was about. So I'll show that clip here.
I want to be an architect and design buildings. And the obstacle is like the streets, like the neighborhoods I go through.
Shooting, fighting.
Yes.
I want to be a criminal profiler for the FBI. The violence, because that made me not even want to go to school.
I want to be a prosecutor. It's saddening that you can't even walk down the street. It's like you gotta pick and choose the right time to leave the house.
Just the other day, somebody tried to rob my brother with a gun at a gas station.
It's like very stressful. That's the most overwhelming thing ever.
The young men joined Obama to launch his My Brother's Keeper initiative aimed at tying together the nation's best mentoring programs and providing educational and economic opportunities to at-risk youth. For the president, this is clearly personal.
When I was their age, I was a lot like them. I didn't have a dad in the house. And I was angry about it. I made bad choices. I got high without always thinking about the harm that it could do. I didn't always take school as seriously as I should have. I made excuses. I could see.
So yeah, I thought that was a kind of powerful example of what the America's first black president can do to help young black men in our country. And I think it kind of stems from some of the things he said in this big press conference he held after the George Zimmerman verdict in the killing of Trayvon Martin. I actually made a video about that, which I didn't have time to put a link to in the video description, but if you're watching this as a recorded show, I'll put a link here so you can look at that. But I really want to get to the crisis in the Ukraine with Russian troops crossing the international border, going into the autonomous Crimea region, which has a lot of Russians in it. And before I do some of the analysis, I want to show first some of the, and show some of the newsmakers and how different politicians were dealing with it. First, I want to show some of the reporters just reporting the breaking news. The first reporter talking about what's happening here is, his name is Ian Lee, and he's a reporter on CNN's State of the Union, which had probably the latest breaking news on what's happening in the Ukraine. And here's a short report from him in this clip.
Well, Candy, what we're hearing right now is from the Ukrainian Border Services website. They're saying that 2 of their installations were overrun today on the Crimea by a mob with what they say is support of Russian military troops. When they overrun these installations, they say that the attackers broke all the doors, destroyed telecommunications and monitoring equipment. Now, the forces inside those installations were able to keep the weapons away, safeguard the weapons in a locked room from the attackers. Right now, we're hearing that the border security is trying to negotiate with the attackers to stop this incident and calm things down. But it's definitely tense times in the Crimea, Candy.
So yeah, that's pretty scary stuff there. That you've got the Russian troops there, and they're surrounding these Ukrainian installations, military installations. And I also want to show a clip from this is Alex Marquart over on This Week with George Stephanopoulos, kind of reporting on the same thing. But he actually interviewed one of the Ukrainian commanders of one of the military bases. And so anyway, I want to show you, hold on, I think I got that. Here it is in this clip.
Invaded Ukraine, this is what they mean. These pro-Russian troops are patrolling the streets of Crimea. They have taken over government buildings and the airports. They will not say a word to us, but their message is loud and clear. A dangerous standoff in Crimea. These well-armed professional troops in full combat gear lining the outer wall of a Ukrainian naval base. No one going in or out. At another base, this commander told us he'd been ordered twice to surrender. But he said his orders were to hold the base and added he was ready to fight. Russian Marines have been seen on the move in Crimea, a region of Ukraine, which is home to Russia's Black Sea Fleet and a mostly Russian population.
So there you can see an actual interview, although they didn't show what he was saying, but an interview with that Ukrainian commander. They're saying that his base has been surrounded and he's going to, he's willing to fight. But so far there really hasn't been any shots fired. One of the most interesting of the reports on this came from Elizabeth Palmer, and she was also over on CNN's State of the Union. Do I have that right? Hold on. I think it's State of the Union. But anyway, she's... oh, no. This was over on CBS's Face the Nation. And she talked about how they were trying to get to Crimea to report on it. And they came across this roadblock, and it wasn't quite what they expected. And I'll talk about it a little more after I show the clip here.
Right, Bob, we drove a long way from Kiev and finally got to this rather informal border across the neck that leads onto the Crimean Peninsula. And there was a barricade in the road manned by what we thought were Ukrainian troops. Well, it turns out these guys had switched sides. They'd hoisted the Russian flag at their barricade, and they were backed up by a group of local men in camouflage gear, also armed, who came and raided our truck, took our gear apart, and stole our body armor. Not only did they steal it, they put it on right away, helmets and flak jackets, walked off with it and told us to get out of there, that they weren't going to let us in.
And that talk about some actual troops, some regular army people with also these irregulars, that kind of reminds me of what happened in the Balkans, like the Serbs, the way they would have like their official forces, and then they'd have like these sort of like hooligan groups that they would all work together. And I don't know, that is not a good sign to me. And also I want to show from CNN State of the Union 2 quick clips they played right at the beginning of State of the Union. One is a clip from the UN Secretary, the NATO Secretary General. No, is it UN Secretary? NATO General. The head of NATO. His name is Anders Fogh Rasmussen, talking about how this is a really bad thing. And then there's actually a quick clip from the acting Prime Minister of Ukraine, and I want to show those quick clips together here.
Realistically, do you expect, Mr. Ambassador, that there will be...
Russia must stop its military activities and its threats.
This is the red alert. This is not the threat. This is actually the declaration of war to my country.
So yeah, there you can see that the head of NATO saying that Russia has to stop its military action, and there's the acting prime minister of the Ukraine saying that this is an act of war. It's I also want to show what the clip I started to show there by mistake. There was a long interview with let me make sure I get his name right. Yuriy Sergeyev, who is the Ukrainian ambassador to the UN. What was kind of interesting on CNN State of the Union is in the first broadcast of the show, they had a long interview with him, and then they only had this really short clip in the rebroadcast 3 hours later. I think it's because his English wasn't that good, and it might have been difficult to understand some of the things he was saying, but I thought they missed some of the good stuff from the first longer interview, and I want to show a clip there where he, at least the Ukrainian ambassador to the UN, he's like the only one who's not ruling out a military reaction to what Russia's doing, and I'll show how he explained how that might happen here.
Realistically, do you expect, Mr. Ambassador, that there will be any military help for Ukraine in this confrontation, or are you looking for sort of a global effort at diplomacy?
Both. We are looking for to raise the world awareness and to address the world leaders to stop this aggression when it's a very first stage, and until Putin has not signed yet this decision of the parliament. Secondly, today the parliament and the government addressed our guarantors under the Budapest memorandum. The Budapest memorandum was signed because of our decision to get rid of nuclear weapons, to protect our nuclear objects, namely the nuclear plants. So it means that we need military support as well.
So military.
Now, the thing he's talking about there, the Budapest Memorandum, that was a memorandum signed in 1994 when Ukraine agreed to give up its nuclear weapons. And I've actually put a link to the text of the Budapest Memorandum down in the video description. I also took a quick screenshot of the text here. And I looked through it, and it didn't seem that there was much there that would give that this would have violated. I mean, of course, Russia violated like Part 1, where the United States, the Russian Federation, and the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland reaffirmed their commitment to Ukraine in accordance with the principles of CSCE Final Act to respect the independence and sovereignty and the existing borders of Ukraine. So Russia's violated that for sure, but when he's saying that he wants action by the guarantors are the United States, Russia, and the United Kingdom. So Russia is actually one of those guarantors. So I wasn't sure exactly why he was like pointing to that particular treaty there. But I actually learned something about Vladimir Putin I didn't know that may make a little more sense. Is I learned that Vladimir Putin is actually a lawyer. I knew he was a former KGB agent, but Jill Doherty, who's former CNN bureau chief in Moscow, is now at the Harvard, I think the Kennedy Center in Harvard, some government academic position, studying government, I think. Anyway, she was on CNN State of the Union, and I normally don't show commentators and then comment on them, although she has a lot of knowledge on this, and she mentioned two things I didn't know, and she was the only one to mention this. One was that Vladimir Putin is a lawyer, and then something she mentioned at the end I thought was interesting too. I'll talk about after I show the clip here.
A trend that you can see with President Putin, which is he is a lawyer, he's very legalistic. When he approaches these issues, he will say, as Ambassador Byerly just said, our people are realistically in trouble in Crimea. We must protect them. It is our sacred duty to protect them. On the other hand, he will depict himself You know, as a statesman who is upholding international law, this is not a violation in his mind. But realistically, on the ground, he is in some form or another beefing up his troops. He is having these troops that are obviously Russian forces, but without the insignia on the streets. And I have to say, with the media, if you look at the media presence of the Russian media in Ukraine, especially Eastern and Crimea, they are whipping up fear of the Kiev government and making this very, very unstable.
So yeah, that last thing she said was also something I hadn't heard anywhere else, was that the Russians were using the media to whip up anti-Ukrainian fervor amongst the ethnic Russian population in the Ukraine. So, I mean, that may help explain why so many people are welcoming so many ethnic Russians are welcoming Russian troops. And of course, I mean, there is kind of a history. The Crimea especially was part of Russia until I think it was 1954. I saw that discussed a couple places, where the Soviet Union actually gave the Soviet Republic of Ukraine the Crimea. And, you know, Russia has a big naval base there in Sevastopol, and so there are already Russian troops in the Crimea, but it still the violation of the border, the sending in of the additional troops. I mean, it is an aggressive military action. And I want to show John Kerry. He was on most of the shows. He wasn't on CNN or Fox News, but he was on This Week with George Stephanopoulos, Meet the Press, Face the Nation. And so the three that have the network nightly news broadcasts, and he made a lot of the same talking points. First, I want to show his main talking point from This Week with George Stephanopoulos, answering the question, you know, what's the U.S. policy on what Putin has done, and you can see him describing it as blatant aggression and something else that I thought he said everywhere. I'll talk about it a little more after I show the clip here.
We hope it's not going to be a disaster. What has already happened is a brazen act of aggression in violation of international law, in violation of the UN Charter, in violation of the Helsinki Final Act, in violation of the 1997 Ukraine-Russia basing agreement. Russia has engaged in a military act of aggression against another country. And it has huge risks, George. It's a 19th century act in the 21st century that really puts at question Russia's capacity to be within the G8.
So, yeah, that is kind of the basic answer he gave on all the shows he was on this morning. He didn't really go much into what some of the sanctions would be, other than questioning whether Russia could be in the G8. The one thing he said there that he said on all the shows where he appeared was that it was a 19th century action that doesn't fit into the 21st century. Of course, I'm not sure why the action's so 19th century. It seems like it happened a lot in the 20th century. I mean, in some ways it reminds me, I mean, I don't want to make a Hitler analogy to Putin, but when Germany took over the Sudetenland, because they said that there were all these ethnic Germans there, and it was part of Czechoslovakia, and that was like the first territorial expansion by Nazi Germany, and that was in the 20th century. And of course, there's all sorts of border disputes and territory wars, and the breakup of Yugoslavia, you know, with Serbia doing a lot of that stuff. And so it seems, and those are just two examples. There are a lot of examples from the 20th century, so I'm not sure why it's a 19th century action and not a 20th century action. And it also seems to be kind of a 21st century action. And I'm going to show here over on John Kerry over on NBC's Meet the Press made that same 19th century point, but in his answer on Meet the Press, he gave a lot more examples of what the United States might do to isolate Russia as a consequence here, and I'll show you that clip now.
Well, we're now discussing all of the options. This is an act of aggression that is completely trumped up in terms of its pretext. It's really 19th century behavior in the 21st century, and there is no way to start with that if Russia persists in this, that the G8 countries are going to assemble in Sochi. That's a starter. But there's much more than that. Russia has major investment and trade needs and desires. I think there's a unified view by all of the foreign ministers I talked with yesterday, all of the G8 and more, that they're simply going to isolate Russia, that they're not going to engage with Russia in a normal business as usual manner, that Russia is inviting opprobrium on the international stage. There could even be, ultimately, asset freezes, visa bans. There could be certainly a disruption of any of the normal trade routine. There could be business drawback on investment in the country. The ruble is already going down and feeling the impact of this. And this is not, you know, the reason for this, David, is because you just don't invade another country on phony pretext in order to assert your interests.
Well, but what
Iraq weapons of mass destruction is kind of the first thing that came to my mind when I hear a Secretary of State of the United States say you don't invade a country on false pretexts. But there is, of course, one big difference between the U.S. invasion of Iraq and the Soviet invasion of the Crimea, or it looks like there may be a difference in that everyone pretty much understood when the U.S. went into Iraq that the U.S. was eventually going to get out of Iraq, and it turns out the U.S. has gotten out of Iraq. Now, that doesn't necessarily make it okay, but it wasn't really a war of territorial expansion. It was a war of regime change and getting someone that the U.S. liked more in there. But yeah, I had to bring up the whole Iraq weapons of mass destruction thing because, of course, John Kerry voted for the Iraq war when he was a senator, and you know that was something that was a problem for him when he ran for president against George W. Bush in 2004. I want to show one more clip from John Kerry talking about again how all options are on the table, I guess including the military ones, although he kind of downplayed the whole military thing, and then what he's looking for from Congress. He mentioned in this next clip of one of his appearances on the Sunday morning shows.
Sir, specified, is the United States willing to impose sanctions if Russia doesn't back down? Are you willing to go to Ukraine and show solidarity with the Ukrainians if Russia doesn't back down?
Absolutely. And the United States, the president is currently considering all options. They're all on the table. We would call on Congress immediately, to the degree that they are prepared to be helpful, that they immediately lay down with us an economic package in order to assist Ukraine. We think it's very important for the international entities, the OSCE, the UN, NATO, the North Atlantic Council, the EU Foreign Affairs Council, which will meet tomorrow, all need to weigh in, and I believe they will weigh in heavily.
So, yeah, there are all these bodies that John Kerry is hoping is are going to weigh in against this Russian invasion of the Ukraine, and he also said he was looking for cooperation from Congress, and that kind of transitions into some of the members of Congress who were on the shows. I'd say the one who was most willing to work with the administration and who seemed to have the most bipartisan approach was Representative Adam Kinzinger, a Republican who was over on This Week with George Stephanopoulos, and he had like a slight dig at the administration by saying that the Russian reset is over. I showed a clip of Secretary of State Hillary Clinton giving this reset button to Vladimir Putin back in the early Obama administration that was supposed to symbolize the reset of the relationship between Russia and the United States. And so Adam Kinzinger makes a sort of subtle dig at that, but in general he says some things making it sound like he's going to support he's supportive of a bipartisan approach to the problem, and I'll show you that clip here.
Look, I think you're going to find a House that's very cooperative with the administration on this. First off, we have to accept that the reset with Russia is over. So let's just get that on the table. And now it's time to respond with strength. I think it's important to talk about economic sanctions. It's important to talk about aid to the Ukrainian people, to get on the record, have Congress on the record supporting the inclusion of Georgia into NATO. So talk about the fact, look, Russia, if you want to threaten your neighbors, including the Ukraine, we're going to go ahead and talk about the expansion of NATO, which is obviously something very important to the Russians. So I think it's important for Congress, and I think you'll see this, to stand very strong with the president and saying, look, we may not be able to respond militarily, but we're going to make it clear that Russia is a pariah state, and not just for the next year, but for the next decade or two going forward. There's going to be huge costs.
So yeah, there was one Republican who was saying that Congress and Republicans in Congress should stand strong with the president, but he seemed to be pretty much the only one, and I'm going to show a couple other Republicans who were heavily critical of President Obama, and I think pretty much needlessly so. And I'll start off with one of my favorite Republicans, and I mean favorite in terms of covering, not in terms of policy, because I always like to do my little Marco Rubio during the show, and here is Senator Marco Rubio of Florida himself criticizing President Obama on his policy towards Russia on Meet the Press in this clip.
How did we get here? Do you agree with some of your colleagues who say it's the weakness of President Obama in the United States right now that has emboldened President Putin of Russia?
Well, I think our policy towards Russia under this administration deserves a heavy amount of criticism. I usually shy away from that in moments of crisis when it's important for the nation to speak with one voice, and I'm encouraged by much of what I've heard Secretary Kerry just say a moment ago, although there are things I'd like to see us do in addition to the steps he's outlined. But I do think, in hindsight, as we look forward to our future relationship with Russia, it's important to learn from the errors of the last few years, where I think we have not accurately, through this administration, assessed clearly what it is Russia's goals are under Vladimir Putin. They're not interested in building an international norm that nations conduct themselves under, like what Secretary Kerry was just describing a moment ago. They're interested in reconstituting Russian power and Russian prestige, often at the expense of U.S. national interests.
But what do you
So, yeah, that was a pretty critical approach to the Obama administration's policy on Russia, which, I mean, I think it's hard to say what it is exactly President Obama should have done differently. And but, of course, Marco Rubio was not the only Republican who was out there criticizing the president because of what Vladimir Putin had done instead of the unity that Republican Adam Kinzinger called for. And I want to show another kind of nasty attack on President Obama because of what's happening in the Ukraine. This is kind of teed up by Candy Crowley on CNN's State of the Union, asking Republican Senator Lindsey Graham, who I guess is trying to be harsh on President Obama because he's in a primary fight before his re-election fight. And so I'll show how he's trying to be as anti-Obama as possible over an answer to Candy Crowley's question here.
Thank you both for joining me today. I'm kind of tempted to say Ukraine go and see what comes out, because this is an ever-changing situation. Let me though try to sort of channel this and say to you, Senator Graham, the president has come out and spoken very forcefully on Friday about consequences. The U.S. has made it clear that it disapproves of what Russia has done. You've been tweeting about strong statements. What more do you want from President Obama at this point?
Well, number one, stop going on television and trying to threaten thugs and dictators. It is not your strong suit. Every time the president goes on national television and threatens Putin or anyone like Putin, everybody's eyes roll, including mine. We have a weak and indecisive president that invites aggression. President Obama needs to do something. How about this? Suspend Russian membership in the G8 and the G20 at least for a year, starting right now. And for every day they stay in the Crimea, add to the suspension. Do something.
Senator.
So, yeah, that was Lindsey Graham's attack on President Obama's policy regarding Russia. And I think what he's suggesting there is something that Obama may end up doing, but I guess not fast enough to suit Senator Lindsey Graham. But I think actually the best criticism of the Obama administration in terms of a succinct soundbite came from Representative Mike Rogers, the chair of the House Intelligence Committee, and he's also been a big critic of the Obama administration on a lot of security issues. And anyway, I want to show you what he said over on Fox News Sunday, where they didn't really let any Democrats give their point of view on it. But here's Republican Representative Mike Rogers making his little pithy remark about Obama versus Putin's strategy in foreign policy in this clip.
Handling relations with the United States.
Well, I think Putin is playing chess, and I think we're playing marbles. And I don't think it's even close. So if you look at the nuclear negotiations, we got our fannies handed to us. They took tactical nukes out of the equation. Huge mistake, especially for our allies in the Baltics. When you move down the list in Syria, the Russians got everything that they needed, they believed they needed in Syria. And so they've been running circles around us, and I think it's really the naive position on the National Security Council and the President's advisors that if we just keep giving things to Russia, they'll finally wake up and say, boy, the United States isn't all that bad. That is completely missing the motivations of why Russia does what Russia does. And again, they have an interest in expanding their buffer zones by influence, I don't think by Russian occupation, but by influence in cases like the Crimea, I think Moldova next, and other places, that it's in their interest to continue to push out that buffer zone. And by the way, the big one that started this was the absolute retreat on our missile defense system in Poland and Czechoslovakia. Caused huge problems for our allies and emboldened the Russians, and it really has been a downhill slide since.
Let's talk about.
Now, I don't think that's really fair in a couple different ways. First of all, I think that to say that it started with Obama not wanting to put the missile defense in Eastern Europe. What about President George W. Bush not doing anything to respond to Putin's in sending troops into Georgia, which is really similar to what's going on now? So, yeah, I don't really buy that analysis. But there was one thing that Republican Representative Mike Rogers said about what Putin's ultimate goal might be here that I don't know if it's true, but it's at least worth considering. He's basically saying that Russia may be considering adding not Ukraine, but the Crimea, which is sort of an autonomous region anyway, adding Crimea to the Russian Federation, and I'll show how he explained that here.
Yeah, I think this is the most important territory to Putin himself. And there's an old expression that Russia without the Ukraine is a country and Russia with the Ukraine is an empire. I do believe Putin understands that. But the most important part for him is military and strategic and both economic impact is the Crimean Peninsula. So I think that's why you see such an aggressive, forceful attempt now to at least build the case for the Crimea to allow them to go into the Russian Federation.
Go into the Federation?
I believe it. Well, we had an interesting thing happen. The upper chamber in Moscow laid out a bill that would allow them to take any part of their portion of was any part of the Ukraine into Russia. That is a dangerous standard indeed, and I think that's probably more bluster. I think clearly that they want the Crimea.
But we're talking annexation then.
I believe that they've allowed them, I think the way they phrased that was to say that if they want to go into the Russian Federation, they would take them. So it wouldn't be a direct annexation from Russia. It would be the Crimea saying they want to come into Russia, and they would allow them to do that. That's the way they structured it.
So, yeah, there is Representative Mike Rogers giving a scenario by which the Crimea may become part of the Russian Federation. I don't know how accurate that is, a prediction of what Putin is trying to do, but that's at least an interesting scenario to consider, so I wanted to put it out there. Now, there really wasn't much in terms of a Obama administration point of view on Fox News Sunday. I guess Secretary of State John Kerry didn't show up on Fox News Sunday, although he wasn't on CNN's State of the Union either. He just showed up on CBS, NBC, and ABC, which are the networks that have an evening news show. But As to why he didn't show up, well, I saw Chris Wallace complaining about it, just like he did last week when Susan Rice didn't come on Fox News Sunday and only went on Meet the Press. But this I thought was a little amusing. If you watch the continuation right after his complaint, I think they may show a reason why it is that they didn't get Secretary of State John Kerry, and you can see that Fox News Sunday clip here.
For the record, we invited Secretary of State Kerry to join us today, but although the White House put him out on all the other broadcast Sunday shows, they declined to make him available to us or you. Up next, former IRS official Lois Lerner refused to testify about the targeting of conservative groups. Now House Oversight Committee Chair Darrell Issa wants to question her again, based on new information he's uncovered. Well,
so yeah, maybe the continuing Fox News coverage of the IRS scandal after it didn't really amount to much could be one reason. And I also mentioned when Susan Rice didn't appear on Fox News Sunday last week that it might have something to do with that Bill O'Reilly interview of President Obama before the Super Bowl that seemed to concentrate on things like the IRS scandal and the Benghazi scandal and all the other like Fox News made-up scandals that, there were certainly issues, but they didn't really have much to do with President Obama or the White House. Now, I was going to show you a couple clips of that IRS scandal coverage on Fox News Sunday, where apparently Lois Lerner, who took the fifth, is going to come back to Congress on Wednesday and is not going to take the fifth, is actually going to testify to Darrell Issa's committee. But I already have almost 30 clips tonight, so I decided not to show you those, but I just wanted to show you Fox News complaining about how they didn't get John Kerry. Of course, they had a lot of other people on. They could have gotten a lot of other Democrats to defend the Obama administration policy. They actually had Democrat Chris Van Hollen, Representative Chris Van Hollen, on the show. Didn't ask him any questions about Ukraine, and it was so bad that he actually broke in to give his opinion on the Ukraine after the previous Ukraine segment, where it was all like Representative Mike Rogers trashing the Obama administration. And I'll show you that clip here.
Because we got limited time, let me bring in Congressman Van Hollen. The president, one of the reasons he says we can afford new spending, even though this is paid for, is because the deficit is going down. But Congressman, that only tells part of the story. According to the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office, the deficit does drop this year and next, but then if you look in the out years, it starts to go up again and reaches over $1 trillion again by 2022.
Well, that's right. If I could just say a quick word on the Ukraine, Chris, response to the earlier section. I think we're 48 hours into an international crisis. I would hope Americans would focus on condemning the actions of Putin rather than in a knee-jerk way, again, criticizing the President of the United States. Let's stand together on this. With respect to the President's budget,
So yeah, there you can see Representative Chris Van Hollen gave a little bit of the Democratic point of view on Obama's performance versus Putin in the Ukraine, but that was like the only glimmer of that point of view that made it onto Fox News Sunday, which maybe they were trying to punish the Obama administration for not sending Secretary of State John Kerry, and that's why Representative Chris Van Hollen's answer to a budget question about the Ukraine there was the only way they let it in. I don't know, but I also want to show, after all, showing all those Republicans saying that President Obama is showing weakness to Putin's strength, and that's why this is happening. I want to show one more clip from Secretary of State John Kerry back on Meet the Press, where he specifically addressed that argument after David Gregory asked him about it, and I'll show you that clip over here.
You say it's not about the U.S. And Russia. But the reality is that just Wednesday, you told my colleague Andrea Mitchell that Vladimir Putin said he would respect the territorial integrity of Ukraine. Now you're talking about Russia annexing the Crimea. Something happened. And I wonder, as you hear some criticism from conservatives who say the issue here is that Vladimir Putin's not afraid, that he saw a red line by this administration in Syria and then no follow-up, no action, that he thinks that he can provoke the U.S. and the West, and that President Obama won't do anything in response.
Well, he's finding out the opposite. Let me make it clear. President Putin is not operating from a place of strength here. Yanukovych was his supported president. Yanukovych was thrown out despite Putin's support. Yanukovych turned on his own people. President Putin is using force in a completely inappropriate manner that will invite the opprobrium of the world, and it already is. He is not going to gain by this. He may be able to have his troops for some period of time in Crimea unless he resolves this. But the fact is he's going to lose on the international stage. Russia is going to lose. The Russian people are going to lose. He's going to lose all of the glow that came out of the Olympics, his $60 billion extravaganza. He is not going to have a Sochi G8. He may not even remain in the G8 if this continues. He may find himself with asset freezes on Russian business. American business may pull back. There may be a further tumble of the ruble. There's a huge price to pay. The United States is united. Russia is isolated. That is not a position of strength.
Two quick.
And I think that's actually an important point, that Vladimir Putin is using a strong military response to what is actually a situation caused by his weakness. His president of the Ukraine, the guy he wanted, Yanukovych, was forced out by street protests. So that shows weakness from Russia, not strength. And so I definitely agree with what Secretary John Kerry was saying there. I also want to show a quick clip from Senator Dick Durbin, who was responding to the one Democrat I've seen who had sort of a pro-Putin position, Representative Marcy Kaptur, I think is her name, and you'll see they'll flash up her quote during Dick Durbin's response here, but I don't think there are very many pro-Putin politicians, and I think they said she was of Ukrainian descent, and I don't know if she's Russian or Ukrainian or why she would say such a thing, but I'll show Dick Durbin over on CNN's State of the Union responding to what Representative Marcy Kaptur said here.
Well, I disagree with Marcy. I think we need to be sensitive to the Russian populations in Crimea. As I've said, this is an historic reality. But the notion that Putin can send in, as Lindsey Graham says, 15,000 troops or whatever the number in order to so-called protect them just defies the sovereignty of Ukraine, and especially the point he made, an agreement which the Russians were signatories to back in 1994. So I would say to my friend Congresswoman Kaptur, we can be sensitive to the Russian reality in Crimea, but don't give license to Vladimir Putin to invade this sovereign nation.
Senators, I want to give...
So yeah, I didn't realize that there were really any people who were pro-Putin in this. I mean, I think the closest you'll get on the Democratic side are people who are praising President Obama for being deliberate and not making threats, or not even just military threats, but threats of any kind of actions before he thinks about whether he can fulfill them. And my favorite comment on this, and this is going to be the last clip I play on the whole Ukraine crisis. This is actually from the mayor of Baltimore. Her name is Stephanie Rawlings Blake, and she uses an allusion to, I think, the title of a rap song when she's talking about why President Obama has to think before he makes any kind of threats, whether they're military or economic. And I believe this was on Meet the Press in this clip.
Elected, he promised to get us out of foreign wars. We are exhausted.
Military conflict necessarily. I don't think that's even an option. But you have to be strong in what you say up front, and then you can follow through with these immediate.
You take one step, you take another step, and then you're going to find yourself in a place where you have to put up or shut up. And we want a president that's going to look at diplomacy and look at other options and not get us into or write a check that our you-know-what doesn't want to cash.
Yeah, so
yeah, that's a good caveat for President Obama to remember when thinking about what he's going to threaten on the Ukraine, which is don't let your mouth write a check that your ass can't cash. That's the rap song. And the person who was talking to the mayor of Baltimore there, Kathleen Parker, she's some pundit. I see her column. She's like a conservative pundit writing about, I can't remember which newspaper she writes for, but it shows up in my newspaper, so she's a syndicated right-wing columnist, and she was saying, well, you have to say strong things to begin with and then work it out later, but I think Mayor Baltimore, Stephanie Rawlings Blake there is correct that you don't want your mouth to write a check that your ass can't cash. So be slow and think through all the steps before you announce any kind of threats, I think is a good policy, and I think President Obama is doing that. They said on, I didn't show the clips, but on Fox News Sunday, they criticized him like 3 or 4 times. Chris Wallace kept mentioning, well, the only thing in his 90-minute phone call with Putin yesterday that they say he threatened was to not go to preparatory meetings for the next G8 summit meeting in Sochi. But of course, there are a lot of other things that he might do, like Secretary John Kerry was talking about all sorts of sanctions, and the Russian banking system is really vulnerable to sanctions, and Russia is actually a lot more dependent on trade with Europe than it used to be, so it has a lot of vulnerabilities to being isolated. So there are a lot of things besides military action that the United States and Europe can do to react to what Putin's done in Crimea, especially if he goes further and tries to bring Crimea into the Russian Federation or sends the troops outside of the area where Russia already has troops and military bases, which makes it a little bit ambiguous about the invasion part, I think. But, of course, there have been Russian troops crossing the international border, so it's not really that ambiguous as to whether it's an invasion. I didn't mean to say that it was, but I do think it adds this extra issue by the fact that they're already Russian military bases and they have a basing agreement. They're just not, I don't know the details of that and whether the troops have to stay in those bases or not. So that's the only reason I bring that up. So I want to get to a couple other quick issues. Those are all the Ukraine clips. I hope you enjoyed those because it's a really important issue, and I hope that leaves you a little better informed about it because I learned some things watching the shows this morning. I also want to show you a quick couple clips on the military budget that President Obama proposed that would actually cut the U.S. Army from like over 500,000 to like 400, from like 550,000 to 420,000 or something like that. I don't remember the exact numbers. They'll come up in the clips. And first I want to show the Republican talking point, of course, expressed by Fox News Sunday host Chris Wallace to Republican Senator from Ohio, Rob Portman, this is the smallest army since 1940 or since before World War II. And then Rob Portman, this is where Fox News Sunday gives like a Republican talking point as a question to a Republican, which is not really the most combative journalistic style, I don't think, but I'll show you. Here's what Chris Wallace said and Rob Portman's reaction in this clip.
I call time on you because we got less than a minute left for Senator Portman. Smallest army since 1940?
It's a problem. And again, you look at what's happening in the Ukraine, but also look beyond Ukraine and look at what's happening in the South China Sea with China. Look what's happening in the Middle East. We could not have done the surge in Iraq, in my view, with an army that size. And so, look, this is a problem, and we need to be sure that these changes in the defense budget are consistent with what we need to do around the world, which unfortunately the United States is still in the position of having to lead around the world to avoid the kind of instability we see right now in Crimea. So, look, this is incredibly important that we get this right. Yes, I agree that we need to be sure we're restraining spending and everything's on the table, waste, fraud, and abuse, every place, including the Pentagon. But let's not take the Army to those levels, because I do think it makes it more difficult for the United States to project force around the world.
Senator Portman.
So, yeah, I mean, first, the reason that talking point is so stupid about the smallest army since before World War II is at that time, the U.S. Army also included the Air Force. There was no separate Air Force. There was all sorts of special forces we have now that we didn't have then. So there are armed forces we have that aren't included in the Army, and we're just talking about trimming down the U.S. Army. And of course, what Senator Rob Portman said there about the Ukraine, I mean, is the size of the U.S. Army really affecting our ability to respond? I don't think anyone on either side is really talking about putting the U.S. Army into that conflict. And also China, I mean, how useful is the U.S. Army when it comes to our conflict or our strategic struggle with China, or the U.S. strategic struggle with China? I don't think the U.S. Army is that dispositive in that dispute. But also to not completely criticize Chris Wallace for using that talking point. I also noticed over on CBS's Face the Nation, Bob Schieffer used the exact same talking point when he was talking to Secretary of Defense Hagel. Chuck Hagel was on, and of course his interview, he was interviewed Friday, so he didn't have anything on the breaking news on the Ukraine because it hadn't happened when he was interviewed, so I'm not going to show any clips of him talking about that. But at least over on CBS's Face the Nation, they were posing the Republican talking point. Well, he is a Republican actually, but to a member of the Obama administration rather than teeing it up to someone who already believes it. They were giving it to someone who was going to refute it, and you can see how Secretary of Defense Chuck Hagel from the Obama administration kind of refutes the whole smallest army since World War II talking point over in this clip.
You want to reduce the size of the army to the smallest size since before World War II. How do you reduce the size of the American military without making it look like to the people around the world that we're somehow retreating, that we're withdrawing from all of this?
You start, Bob, with the reality of where we are in the world today. This budget, it is the first budget in 12 years that's not a budget based on war footing. We've been at war for 13 years, constantly. 2 wars. We're out of one war, Iraq, and we're coming out of the longest war we've ever been, Afghanistan. Not unlike after every war the United States has been in, you reset your posture, you reset your assets, you reset your whole enterprise based on the new realities and based on preparing that institution for the challenges of the future. But answer your question, then how do you adjust to the dangerous, complicated world that we're in? We've increased, for example, cyber assets, increased special operations. We're focusing on readiness, capability, our capacity, our ability to do the things that we need to do in the strategic interests of the strategic guidance that the President laid out in 2012.
So yeah, I thought that was a really good explanation of why we don't need really that big an army, and why, since we're finally ending our constant state of war, hopefully, there won't be, we've ended our troop deployment in Iraq, and it looks like we may have no troops in Afghanistan at the end of this year, and certainly just a small force, depending on what the United States works out with Karzai, or the government that follows Karzai's government, but that's a whole other issue. But I thought that was an important debate, and it probably would have gotten a lot more coverage if it hadn't been for the invasion or semi-invasion or whatever you want to call it of Russian troops into Crimea and the Ukraine, which I think lessened the coverage of some other issues that would have gotten more coverage. And one of those issues that probably would have gotten more coverage if it hadn't been for the Ukraine invasion is this veto by Republican Arizona Governor Jan Brewer of a law passed by Arizona's Republican legislature that would have allowed private businesses to refuse service to people based on their religious beliefs. And it was the main issue that was talked about, and even by the advocates, was that it was going to allow businesses to stop serving gay people if they had some religious aversion to serving gay people. And of course, this was framed on Fox News Sunday as a choice between religious freedom and gay rights, which I think is not, I think, a little bit too simplistic, as I'll talk about after I show a few more clips. But first I want to show that Fox News Sunday framing from the first minute of Fox News Sunday in the intro in this clip.
Arizona Governor Jan Brewer vetoes a bill that would protect religious freedom over gay rights. But other states may take up similar measures. Our Sunday panel weighs in.
And you see that one person on the panel there is Elise Viebeck, excuse me, and she works for The Hill, which is a newspaper or a news magazine about politics. I think it's a magazine. I can't remember, but I've seen several of the people from there on Fox News, and I tried to research Elise Viebeck, and I saw she worked for a conservative paper when she was in college, but not much else in terms of her politics. But I saw her say one thing on the panel on Fox News Sunday that I thought was kind of outrageous on the whole anti-gay law. She seemed to be blaming Democrats for making it an issue, even though in Arizona it was passed by a Republican legislature and then vetoed by a Republican governor, but somehow it's the fault of the Democrats, and I'll show you that clip here.
Well, we've actually counted 10 states that are considering similar legislation to Arizona's, including Florida, where Rick Scott, who's running for re-election, in fact came out and said he would veto the measure this week, which is very interesting from Rick Scott in Florida. I think we're likely to see Democrats try to exploit this in the midterm elections because it is an issue that's dividing the top from the bottom of the Republican Party. The major interests, business interests, national Republican leaders are divided from the base on this issue, just as they are in many others, including the expansion of Medicaid under Obamacare and raising the debt ceiling. So I think Democrats see an opening here in an election cycle that's not likely to be friendly to them, and they're going to continue to emphasize the issue as a way to boost their viability at the polls.
Now, of course, part of that analysis is correct. I think that Democrats will try to exploit this, but I don't think that you can start there because they're exploiting something that already exists. And the other part about that is she said it was a divide between the top and the bottom, the business at the top, and I guess it's the religious people at the bottom. I'm not sure exactly what she meant by that, but I think there's another part in here, and that's the libertarian perspective. And I saw one comment from Republican Adam Kinzinger back on ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos, where he mentioned how it was actually business and the free market that brought this veto from the governor of Arizona. You know, they were saying they were going to lose all these conventions and they might lose the Super Bowl next year if they passed this law that allowed businesses to refuse service to gays. And so I want to show that clip from This Week with George Stephanopoulos, and then George Stephanopoulos himself makes a little comment about it after Republican Adam Kinzinger at the beginning of this clip.
Well, look, I think what's very interesting about all this, and as a federal guy, I try not to always get involved in other states that I don't live in, but I'll tell you what's very, yeah, it always works out. But what's interesting is the politics of this. I mean, if you look at something became whether, you know, unjustifiably or justifiably a very big deal, you know, you had the NFL threatening to pull out, you had bans being threatened. It's interesting to see how the politics on this issue works now, where you can bring, in essence, the free market into to bring pressure on state government.
In some ways, I read someone said the Fortune 500 has become the most effective lobby for gay rights. Right now,
yeah, I like that quote. I don't know who he's quoting there. Someone said that Fortune 500 has become the biggest lobby for gay rights. But that's true, that there's a lot of economic power, and not just from the LGBT community itself, but from the people who support the rights of the LGBT community. And I think that's become a majority at this point, and it does split the Republican Party. I want to show one of the possible Republican candidates for president, Marco Rubio, was trying to find the part of this that he could support the law that Governor Brewer vetoed. He was trying to say that there was some real issue, and I'm going to talk about whether I think that's a real issue. There have been some cases where there is sometimes a difficult line to draw, but here, anyway, I'll show first Senator Marco Rubio talking about this in this clip.
Well, here's what the key issue is. On the one hand, I think Americans, myself included, the vast majority of conservatives as well, are against discrimination. The notion that someone, because they are gay, would be denied service at a restaurant or so forth is something not Americans don't support, conservatives don't support. The other side of the equation is, imagine now if you are a Southern Baptist or a Catholic or evangelical photographer who does not believe, because of your faith, in gay marriage. And because of that, you don't want to provide photographic services for a gay marriage. Should you be sanctioned by the state for refusing to do so? I think that's what they endeavored to deal with in Arizona. I don't know never read the law. As I said, we've been pretty busy this week on a number of fronts. The governor maybe felt that that law extended beyond that, but that is also a legitimate concern, and it's one we're going to have to balance here as this issue continues to unfold across the states here in America.
But you don't think this was an open and shut case? This was tough for you? You think the law had some merit without saying that you support it?
Well, I don't believe that gay Americans should be denied services at a restaurant or hotel or anything of that nature. I also don't believe, however, that a caterer or a photographer should be punished by the state for refusing to provide services for a gay wedding because of their religious held beliefs. So we've got to figure out a way to protect that as well.
Now, there is kind of a difference there between the way this issue has been presented and the argument Marco Rubio and some others have been making. Excuse me. Sorry about that. Yeah, a lot of people have been presenting this as an issue of like restaurants and hotels refusing to serve gay people. But they're also talking about people who don't want to provide personal services like photographers and bakers and florists for like gay weddings. And there was a case of a photographer in New Mexico who was forced to, or at least ended up being punished for not providing his photography services for a gay wedding. And excuse me, I had a little bit of a cold and I'm just getting over it here, and so excuse me for coughing, but I do see that there is kind of a difference between what's called a public accommodation, which is like a restaurant or a hotel or someplace that you need if you're traveling, and then the personal services of like a photographer or a baker or a florist for a wedding. And you know, I'm thinking when I was in law school, I learned in contract law that you can't force someone to perform personal services. If you have a contract for personal services and they don't perform, you can get money damages, but you can't actually get the court to force them to perform personal services because you really wouldn't want someone to do that. But then again, when I thought about that, I also thought, well, you can still get the money damages, and so maybe people who don't want to perform the personal services should have to pay some sort of monetary penalty, and I don't have a problem with that part. But I just wanted to make that distinction between public accommodations, and maybe in some states what they define as public accommodations is too broad, because is a photographer really a public accommodation? I'm not sure it is, but on the other hand, if you're going to advertise and hold yourself open to the public, you really should serve the whole public. And there was a clip I almost showed from Van Jones, who was on This Week with George Stephanopoulos. He talked about how 1 or 6 words we've gotten rid of in the United States is we don't serve your kind here. And, you know, whatever that kind is, you know, if you're open to the public, you should serve the public. And the other point I wanted to make is, even if you don't believe in gay marriage, I'm not sure it violates your religious beliefs to have to photograph a gay marriage. How is that violating your religious beliefs? It doesn't make you gay. It doesn't even make you endorse gayness or even endorse gay marriage to actually photograph it or to bake a cake for it or to provide flowers for it. So I think that's the real weakness in the religious freedom argument, because there's nothing in anyone's religious beliefs that doesn't allow them to photograph or bake a cake for or provide flowers for a wedding, even if they don't believe in that wedding. So I wanted to make that point. And having made that whole argument, I want to show conservative Bill Kristol over on HBO's Real Time with Bill Maher last Friday. This is kind of one of my favorite clips from the whole show here, talking about how he thinks that people shouldn't have to provide personal services, you know, outside the whole religious realm, just to people who they don't like. And he makes sort of a startling admission in the midst of his argument here that I'll talk about a little bit after I show the clip here.
It's not. I'm surprised because you're kind of a libertarian and a person who likes freedom. You think people should be compelled to offer their services to weddings they don't want to be part of or something like that? I think that's a tough call, honestly. I mean, seriously, leaving aside religion.
That's kind of a
leaving
slip.
aside religion. It's a
Really?
slippery slope either way. I agree, but you don't want people to discriminate. Certainly not on the grounds of race. That's prohibited, even in the private sector. You don't want government to discriminate. But I think it's a tough call. It is a tough call in the private sector. If someone doesn't want to provide a service to my wedding because they don't like me because I'm a conservative, imperialist, warmonger, etc., I think they should have the right. I don't think they should be compelled to be part of my wedding if they don't want to be. So I think it's a tough call, actually. There are competing liberties here.
Yeah, I really like that part where, yeah, if someone doesn't want to give me wedding services because I'm a conservative, imperialist warmonger, well, that's fine with me. But, I mean, that's still, whatever, whether it's religion, maybe you don't want to provide services to someone. But if you're saying you're open to the public and then you discriminate against someone based on their political beliefs or their sexual orientation or any of those other reasons, I mean, maybe if you're going to really stand on principle, then you maybe should have to pay a fine or not be able to advertise or not be able to hold yourself up as being open to the public, or because I can understand a public policy that doesn't allow anyone to say we don't serve your kind here. And so I just want to make that point. And I have one final clip I want to show. This is a marijuana clip. I know my viewers are real interested in marijuana legalization, or that seems to be a real popular topic. And I want to show a clip from my governor, Jerry Brown, was over on Meet the Press, NBC's Meet the Press, and he talked about various things, about how he's done a lot of good things to turn California around budget-wise. And it shows how, when Democrats control the whole legislature, they have like a veto-proof or filibuster-proof majority in the legislature where they don't need any Republican votes, and they have a Democratic governor that they can actually get some things done. But I'm not going to show any of those clips. I'm going to show the one where he kind of like wimped out on the whole marijuana legalization, and his argument was like somehow it's almost a fascist argument where citizens owe their clear thinking heads to the state somehow. But I'll show you the clip and then get to the comment section real quickly afterwards here.
California. Well, we have medical marijuana, which gets very close to what they have in Colorado and Washington. I'd really like those two states to show us how it's going to work. The problem with anything, a certain amount is okay, but there is a tendency to go to extremes. And all of a sudden, if there's advertising and legitimacy, how many people can get stoned and still have a great state or a great nation? World's pretty dangerous, very competitive. I think we need to stay alert, if not 24 hours a day, more than some of the potheads might be able to put together.
So yeah, we can't legalize marijuana because it'll make our states uncompetitive, because we need to stay alert more than the potheads are going to stay alert. I don't know, Governor Jerry Brown. I don't know, it seems like maybe reminds me of a Dead Kennedy song, California Uber Alles, but I won't go into that. But what I am going to go into now, since that was the last clip, I'm way over an hour and I need to stop this show and get to dinner real quick. But since I have way over 100 people watching the show, and I want to reward you all for showing up to watch the clips live, I want to delve into the comment section here. I was looking through it when some of the clips were playing, and I got the feeling that there was a lot of arguing going on about not really on topic things, but I want to try to get in here. Let's see, I'll scroll back to the beginning. There's a lot of talk about a big argument that had nothing to do with anything I was showing, about Bernie Sanders and the Democrats running for president. I'm trying to scroll through all that and find a couple on-topic comments here. Hans Blick says, Graham is a naughty catfish. I don't know what that means. Oh, that's right. Amaze Satsuma says, remember when the far right was calling this weak president lawless and abusing his power? That's true. They don't really look for consistency in their arguments. Oh, JRM 102 says missile defense, lol. Yeah, like missile defense was going to stop Russia from sending troops into Crimea. That it didn't stop them from sending troops into Georgia, right? So that was kind of a silly argument. I agree with that. Hans Blix also says, remember when W. Bush called Putin Pooty Poot? No, I don't remember that. So Atheist Simplicity says, when USSR, Western powers came, collapsed the ruble. I'm not sure what that means, but John Kerry was talking about how the ruble is in bad shape, and that's one of the reasons that Putin is not really in a position of strength. Dustin Leo once says, there is no IRS scandal. Well, I mean, they did use a bad standard when they were looking for who to audit on their applications for 501c4 status, but I didn't want to go into all that. Let me see. I'm going to take one or two more quick comments here if I can find. Let's see. Hans Blick says that I do answer his questions. Well, yeah, I think I quoted you twice there. Well, that's because you post so many comments. When I'm scrolling through here, I see like your comments is like 50% of the comments, and it's hard to do this as a live show. Let's see. Chris Kane, Charlie Kane says, LiberalViewer, please answer this question. Why do you and so many people call it the Ukraine? I don't know. Many years of playing Risk. I'm sorry. I don't really. I think everyone calls it Ukraine, the Ukraine. I don't know why we call it the Ukraine. And I wanted to read this before I end. Someone answered something. Self-Filmulator says, LV wondered about the bases. Russia has naval bases in the Crimean city Sevastopol. Under the terms, any movement of Russian troops outside the base must be authorized by Ukrainian government. I don't know if that's true or not, but if that's true, then Russia is definitely in violation of another treaty there. Because, I think it's hard to justify what Russia's doing. I think I made that clear that whether you want to call it an invasion or people outside their bases. I mean, the only reason I mention that is because it's hard to. I mean, I think it clouds the issue of whether troops are invading when they already have a right to be in the country, but that actually makes it more of an invasion if they're supposed to stay in their bases unless they have government approval. So, this is, like I said last week, this is a fast-moving situation. I don't know where it's going to go. I hope it doesn't turn into a hot war. That so far no shots have been fired, so that's like the good news. And hopefully the fact that Putin isn't really acting from a position of strength means that there will be some solution that doesn't require people to shoot at each other anymore. I mean, there were shots fired back in Kiev. There were these snipers taking out protesters, but at least this latest round hasn't been like a real shooting war, and hopefully it won't become one. So I got to finish up the show here. Like I said, I'm well over an hour. I guess I'm like almost an hour and 15 minutes now. So thanks for joining me. If you want to look back, I know the Academy Awards are going on, and I did make a video about Woody Allen and criticizing an MSNBC discussion of Woody Allen's molestation allegations from the 1990s that I thought weren't very fair. I don't know if Woody Allen won. I haven't watched the Oscars. I'm recording them. I'll probably go and checking out what happened there and some other stuff after I finish the show. But I don't know if any of you are Oscar fans, but thanks for joining me. This is my LiberalViewer Sunday Live Clip Roundup that I do every Sunday at 6:30 p.m. Pacific Time. This Wednesday, I'll also be answering any questions you want to ask on any topic for my LiberalViewer First Wednesday live Q&A show that I do the first Wednesday of every month. So look for that. If you want to ask me questions about anything, go ahead, and I'll be answering them this Wednesday at 4:30 p.m. Pacific Time. For my U.S. viewers, I hope you enjoy the end of your weekend. For my viewers in Europe, I hope you are enjoying the beginning of your week, and around the world, wherever you are in whatever time zone, I hope I started your week in a more informative way than you would have had otherwise. I hope you enjoyed the clips I picked out for you. It took me a lot of time. That's why I started a little late. I apologize for that. I'll try to be a little better in the subsequent weeks. Hope you enjoy my Liberal Viewer Sunday Live clip roundup, and I'll be seeing you all around the internet.